soon as the valley was gone. We feel just as heavy as lead, but we never get up to the stars and bring the breakfast up to bed.
Hello and welcome to episode 12 of God's Own Scale podcast, your 6mm and smaller occasionally dedicated podcast for all things wargaming. I'm Sean Clark, your host. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you're well. I'm just recovering from a bout of what has been described as norovirus, not coronavirus, thankfully, but norovirus, where I've been laid low for 4 or 5 days, which has just put me behind schedule a touch, but nothing too untoward, and I'm back in the editing seat and back with what I think is another great episode for you with Mark Backhouse, who I'm sure many of you will be aware of through his work with Wargame Soldier and Strategy magazine, and in particular his work in 2mm. Yes, not 6mm, but 2mm. He does game in 6mm, but has come to some prominence due to some of the wonderful things he's done in that even smaller scale. Slight change in the format for the show that I'm just going to try. I'm going to have a little bit of a news section prior to the interview, and then afterwards will be my hobby update. When I say news, it's not going to be reporting news, it's just going to be me commenting on a couple of things that I've noticed. A couple of things of note, I'm sure you're all aware, Partisan, or the other Partisan, in October has just been cancelled, which is a great shame, but entirely understandable. I think we're coming to the realisation that this year is going to be pretty much a washout for traditional wargame shows in the sense that we've known them over the last few years. Government guidelines are changing on a nearly daily basis, really, but the thought of nearly 1,000 people together in one room, wargaming, the hustle and bustle of bring and buys, standing at stalls talking to the honest traders there, seems a little way off yet. Unfortunately, I'm as desperate as anybody to get back to the show scene. In fact, I was watching a video by a recommended YouTube channel called Boots on the Table. Check him out. I forget the guy's name, but it's a great YouTube channel based on historical wargaming, and he did a walkthrough of Colours 2019 from last year, and I had quite a nostalgic feeling looking at it, watching the hustle and the bustle of the games, the traders, the bring and buy, and it's made me realise just how much I've missed it. I've just had the one show this year, which was Allenwell, which was just prior to lockdown, and there's definitely some influence on the attendance at that show. Let's keep safe and hope that next year things do abate and we can return to some sort of normality, but obviously health, safety, welfare of everybody is the prime concern. And let's face it, it doesn't stop us spending. So long as your honest trader is able to keep up with demand. And the second point of that is, as we know, Bacchus Miniatures, Peter Berry's been on the show a couple of times, a favoured 6mm producer of mine, has announced that the shopping cart should be open again at some point in early August. So as I record this, it's the 26th of July. So maybe another week or so and the announcement will go out. Now I anticipate, as happened last time, it'll be open for around 24 hours before the order book is at capacity. So if you do have something that you're wanting to buy from Peter, make sure you get it in as early as possible, because I would say that within 24 hours it'll be closed again. I don't know what the situation is with staffing at Bacchus and how close they are to returning to any sort of normality, but I think we have to accept at the moment, as things stand, that this 24-hour window, ordering window, is going to be the model for the short term. I don't think it'll be a long-term thing. I'm fairly sure Peter will be getting back on his feet and things will be returning to some normality in the not too distant future. But if we're aware of it, then we know when to order, get that list done. I've certainly got one which I'll talk about at the end of the show, which is ready to go. I'm looking forward to that. And like most wargamers, I've got plenty of stuff to paint. So yes, a little bit of an inconvenience if that inspiration hits at 1 o'clock in the morning and you're desperate to get yourself a whole 7 years war collection to fight the battles of Frederick the Great, and you can't get them just at this moment. Well, I'm sure if you look in the drawers or the cabinets or cupboards or boxes that you've got in your room or wherever it is that you stock your wargaming stockpile, I'm sure you've got something that'll just keep you ticking over until such time as that window opens again. I know that Peter disclosed he'd had a couple of quite large orders, so people are obviously taking advantage of the fact that the shopping cart is reopening and throwing in large orders to keep them in 6mm goodness for the time being. So look out for that. There may be another show prior to the opening of the shopping cart, but I can't guarantee it. So 26th of July, I'm recording this, it will go out, the show will be out tonight, so you may have a week in which to make that order, make your decision and get that order sorted. Finally, I've seen across the Twitters Jasper Orthoys asking for questions that we think should go into the annual Great War Games survey conducted by War Games Soldier and Strategy. If you're on Twitter, then I suggest get over there, and if you've got a contribution to make, if you've got an idea about what sort of questions this year's survey should be asking, then get over there and make your contribution. This year has been probably the most unusual year in our lifetime, so maybe the questions of this year's survey should reflect that. So just go over and have a look, and obviously, and especially bearing in mind who you're about to listen to, check out War Games Soldier and Strategy magazine. It's my favourite magazine. We are very lucky that we've got 3 magazines here in the UK that are great. They each serve their own purpose and do a great job of promoting the hobby. WSS is just the one that I've always turned to, just because of the format really, and I do talk about that a little bit in the interview with Mark. Okay, so that's enough from me. I will be back at the end of this show just to give you a little bit of a hobby update, to say where I am with my own little projects, but for now, let's talk about
Mademoiselle from Armentières, save to you. Sing it with all your heart and soul and see everyone right up the pole. Mademoiselle from Armentières.
I think it's episode 12.
It's 11 or 12.
Yeah, I think I've got one to send out with Henry.
With Henry 11, I think.
So you're the round dozen, mate.
A dirty dozen, indeed.
A dirty dozen. Right. Welcome to God's Own Scale podcast. And myself and my guest have just worked out, we think we're episode 12, the dirty dozen. And he's referred to himself in that manner, but I'll let him introduce himself now. So, Mr. Mark Backhouse, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks very much, Sean. Thanks for inviting me on.
That's all right. I keep talking about a hit list I've got of potential guests. It's not a hit list as in you're going to get a red dot on your forehead and taken out at 3 miles. It's a hit list of renowned names and faces throughout this hobby, and you're one of them.
Well, it's funny that you might say that. I think my name's quite well known, but in fact, I'm quite conspicuous, actually. I can walk quite happily around war game shows, and nobody knows who on earth I am most of the time. And I only sometimes get recognised if I'm wearing a WSS T-shirt with staff written on the back.
Right.
Often that just means that members of the public walk up to me and ask me where the toilets are and that kind of thing. So, I'm fortunate in that my face is largely hidden. I can get away with looking around the show properly without being harassed all the time by people asking me about articles all the time, which is quite good, really.
You managed to keep your anonymity.
Well, not deliberately so, but it's just that's the bit. Let's face it, wargaming celebrity is about sort of a Q-list celebrity anyway, isn't it? Really, in the real world. So, but I'll take the fame. I don't mind that. I'll roll with it a little bit, Sean. That's good.
Right. Well, it's great to have you on the podcast, mate, because your name is one that I've been following for some time with. Not only with some of the smaller scale work that you do, but the articles that you've had published. You run a Lardy Day, I think, don't you, down south?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I've got we've run that now for 2 years. Yeah, come and have a go if you think you're lard enough.
Excellent.
Yeah.
In fact, just before dialing into the call, I was refreshing my memory of the Siege of Portsmouth game. It was Portsmouth, wasn't it?
It was Portsmouth, yeah.
I'd suddenly got Plymouth in my head for some reason, but then I thought, no, we've just discussed the coast of Portsmouth. I knew it began with a P and it was on the south coast. So, mate, thanks very much for taking up your evening to talk to me on episode 12 of God's Own Scale podcast. As I generally do, we'll go through a bit of a hobby bio with you, if that's okay, and then just move on to the more serious matters of the small scales and the big things that we can do with them. So just for anybody that hasn't heard of you, and if they haven't heard of you, I want to know why they haven't heard of you, because they won't have been reading Wargame Soldier and Strategy. But just give us a bit of a potted bio, if you would.
Well, I suppose like most people, I was into gaming from a young age with Airfix figures and that kind of thing. I suppose I started off without any rules at all. I used about 4 or 5 of the big tub of Airfix figures that my mum had brought from the local jumble sale. I think the week earlier I just watched the 1970 Waterloo film on television. And I remember very distinctly setting up all the French cavalry coming towards the British squares and that kind of thing there. My mum looked on and said, "How did you know they formed squares?" and that kind of thing. And I remember the film, obviously. Yeah. So I've always enjoyed playing with toy soldiers and that kind of thing there. Although as a kid I was never allowed guns or anything like that to play with. My parents were always sort of a bit CND and sort of ban the bomb type people. So
right.
I suppose my form of rebellion there was to be interested in military history all the time. And I suppose I got into gaming then properly. A friend of mine had a few of the old board war games in the early 80s. I remember playing things like Cry Havoc and War at Sea and things like that there. Probably aged about 5 or 6 or 7, probably far too young really to play these games properly, really. And we used to play a lot of the old board games like Escape from Colditz and things like that there. And then in the 80s, I suppose I got into collecting little lead figures, a set of miniature ones. And I've still got a bit of a passion for the old Hammer figures from the 1980s and Warhammer Fantasy Battle and that kind of thing. And then in the 90s, I got into playing more Napoleonic things. What was I playing there? Bruce Quarry's rules from out of the library, I kind of guess, there in the early 90s. And then when all my friends were buying sensible magazines, I would spend my pocket money on War Games Illustrated or miniature war games or whatever, and be reading up all the war games rules and that. But I never really got to play games regularly against historical opponents very much in the early 90s. At university, I did a little bit of historical gaming, and then I did a history degree, by the way. And then after that, then I came back to my home area around here on the south coast in Hampshire, and I joined up with a local club here. And that club was part of the remnants of Donald Featherstone's originals of 1960s Southampton Club, which had divided into 2 different parts there. And I joined one part of that there, which is sort of on the east side of Southampton. And I've been gaming there ever since for the last 20 or so years. And the last, how many long now, 12 years or so, I've been writing for Wargame Soldier Strategy magazine, and I've been helping out Guy there with that quite a bit, as I became mates with Guy through playing Warhammer Ancient Battles about a decade and a bit ago. I organised a games day playing his Siege and Conquest rules and writing scenarios for that. And he came along, so we became mates after that. And ever since, I've been supplying him with articles. So I'm now his sort of go-to man. If there's ever something obscure that Jasper wants an article on, normally Guy turns to me and says, "Mark, you don't game this, do you?" But normally I shrug my shoulders and say, I don't, but I can. So I go away and read up on it there, and I invariably end up painting something for it and gaming it and writing an article for him. So I think I don't know quite how many articles I've written now. Henry was trying to get me to talk about this last year on his blog. I was well over 100 articles last year, so I must have done. I normally do a couple each edition of Wargames After Strategy, so we've had another 6 editions. So yeah, I must have done about 115, 120 articles now for Wargames After Strategy.
Blimey.
So quite a few there, a few thousand words there. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's interesting. I've just made a couple of notes there. I think people of a certain generation follow a certain familiar route, don't we, into this hobby. I've talked about the grain of the hobby before. I think there's a bit of a pushback against that in certain quarters because there are younger people coming through into the hobby, but certainly people of a certain generation who have got that fondness for the film Waterloo.
Well, my son now has enjoyed that. All my sons have enjoyed that quite a bit. My youngest son in particular likes all these sort of 70s war films like that. There, he went through an obsessed phase of watching Zulu Dawn on repeat at one point there, which was rather concerning probably for everybody else involved. But we loved it and then we were happy. So you've got to enjoy the old ones as well.
Well, there's certainly a habit at My Club in Stoke of quoting vast lines from the likes of Waterloo or Zulu Dawn.
It's got to be done, isn't it?
Whatever, it's got to be done, mate. Yeah, it's part of the journey, isn't it? And also that Bruce Quarry book, that's come up a few times lately in discussions either online or on a couple of podcasts. I think you wrote or somebody wrote.
Yeah, I've written a blog about it. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah,
I'll send a copy of it from my friend Charlie Walker.
Yes.
Because actually, when I was reading it, frankly, I was on about the 4th or 5th edition of it. This was in the early 90s, and the original was 1977, or before I was even born, I think.
Yeah.
So I remember distinctly playing it and thinking, God, this set here is pretty archaic, pretty backwards. But in so many areas, it was fantastic, and the depth of the detail, and the battalion compositions, and the sort of the march speeds and things like that inside it. That just for somebody who had a lot of imagination, really caught my brain on fire. Really, so I remember going away and designing an entire Peninsula campaign based around this age, about 13, with massive maps of Spain and working out where all the troops were and all the different divisions and how big they were. I mean, I never painted all the stuff for it. But it obviously really captured my imagination there, really sparked it off a lot to want to go and game some more. So a fantastic book there, and well worth getting if you haven't picked it up there. So thank you, Charlie, for sending that down there and rekindling my love of all things Quarry, really. I did have some rules inside it are turgidly slow, and I wouldn't really recommend playing them through, but
I'm not sure I ever played them. I had it from quite an early age, and ironically used because now this is a 6mm podcast, albeit I've gamed in most scales. I used the irregular miniatures blocks, 6mm blocks, as my sort of foundation in Napoleonics, but used a set of rules called To the Sound of the Guns. I don't know if you ever saw that by Tabletop Games, which was the only set of Napoleonic rules I ever knew about, other than what I'd read in Quarry. And to be frank, I didn't understand what was going on.
I'm not sure we did really, but
no. But the Sound of the Guns was one of those classic sets of rules where there's tables of modifiers, and I think it was a 1 to 20 figure scale, and you might kill 16/20ths of a figure. And you have to make note of that.
Yeah, it does you numeracy the world of good as a teenager, actually.
Yeah. But I think, similar to yourself, the destiny is set, isn't it, at that age? If you're drawing big maps of Spain and and designing campaigns at 13. Your destiny for your life is there.
A little bit that way. I mean, I've dabbled with a few other sort of history, military things. I did quite a lot of reenactment in my teenage years. I did a lot of World War II reenactment stuff. And in fact, I was invited to be an extra in Saving Private Ryan, actually, just before I went off to university. And like an absolute fool, I turned it down to then go on holiday with the love of my life, who dumped me the next year or something anyway. But, as he says, but my best friend at the time there walked past the camera and had about 4 seconds of airtime on it there. And I was always a bit disappointed afterwards. I didn't get involved in that. And then at university, I did a lot of Dark Age reenactment stuff as well. So I was reminiscing on Twitter about that the other day, actually. And I was quite seriously into being a Norman knight for quite some time and going out and clobbering people around the country, which was quite good fun. I suddenly realised that I was mortal. Pardon me, sorry?
Did you have the horse as well?
No, I never had the horse. There was a whole group of us actually who did go on to doing horse riding stuff, but I was always a bit scared of the horses, really. They've got you can at least control other people and they know what they're doing, but with horses they're a bit of an unknown quantity, really. But I got to a point at which I had a few quite nasty injuries, and I thought, no, I think a more sedate hobby is probably required, but still involved in military history, and so I got back into the wargaming in a big way after university. So,
And you turned it into a profession, didn't you? Are you teaching at the moment?
Yeah, I'm a secondary school teacher. I'm a sixth form teacher. I teach history and I teach ancient history as well. So there's a degree of overlap with it there. I don't teach that much military history, really. It's not specifically military history of GCSEs and things, but if I can squeeze in the odd exciting battle reenactment or something inside there, or dress up in my armour and bring that in to bring the lessons to life, and that's good fun. The kids enjoy it and they take away something from it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So in lockdown, the last week or so, I've been in teaching sixth formers all about Pompey the Great, so that's been good. And Sertorius in Spain, so nice to get a little bit of that sort of passion in there, and also the Glorious Revolution as well, and James II and things, and William and Mary. So there's lots of stuff that overlaps, and I think probably helps me to develop the context of my scenarios and that kind of thing. And a lot of people who game with me quite often sometimes they're probably sick to death of it actually, but they quite like the fact that often before a battle I'll try to explain a bit about it, the context of it. So it has some sort of relevance rather than, you roll the dice all evening long and at 11 o'clock you pack up and go home again. Hopefully there's some sort of meaning behind it all inside it, some sort of purpose. I enjoy that as much as I do the sort of the really military side to it as well, I think.
Yeah, history's a lot wider than battles and wars, isn't it? Most certainly. So you're linked to the magazine Wargame Soldier and Strategy, which I don't think I've talked an awful lot about on this podcast, but I should have done because it's my favourite of the magazines.
You're just saying that now, aren't you?
Well, if there's any free subscriptions going, obviously you know where to find me. But no, it is absolutely my favourite of the magazines. I think the particularly from the columns that are in there on a fairly regular basis. And the period-specific nature of the articles that we get in the magazine just have that greater appeal, I think. So you got involved in that through knowing Guy Bowers?
Yeah, so I met Guy about 2008, and I think at that point there I'd written a few scenarios for a games day that I'd been running. And he'd just become editor of John Kersey, who'd been running this was now when it was owned by the Spanish version of WSS. And Guy took it over for about 2 or 3 editions and ended up using some of my, 1 or 2 of my articles inside it just before it all closed down. And then the magazine obviously disappeared then for about 10 months, I think, something like that there, or at least the English-speaking version of it did, before Jasper brought it up. And in the meantime then, we suddenly had a very panicky need to try and get a first edition together. It came together very, very quickly, and they were under quite a lot of pressure to turn it into a first edition magazine that was going to be out on the shelves in WH Smith's. And in the end, I think they ended up talking to me and saying, could you write an article on this? And I said, yeah, no problem. And about 2 days later, then Guy had an article, and he said, any chance you could write an article on this? And I said, yeah, no problem. And then by the end of it, I think I wrote about 3 or 4 articles for the original issue 54 that was of the newly the new version of WSS when it was released, which was quite exciting to see your name in print quite so much. But also, I felt a lot of pressure, I suppose, on me there. Would people actually like what we were producing and what I was writing, or was this just a filler to keep it going? But luckily, guys kept me on as a sort of person to call to if he needs articles on things, and I think he likes the fact that I can normally knock out an article fairly quickly on most subjects. So I'm quite often his go-to person if there's something bizarre and obscure that he wants.
And has writing one of those articles ever led to you gaming that period, or
constantly? Yeah, I mean, Guy often says, "Oh, go and research this," or can you write me an article on this? And I'll quite often have to, go and either borrow some figures off someone else to play the game out, the scenarios out, or just start collecting them very, very quickly. And unfortunately, that's a real problem with my figure collection, because it means that I've got lots and lots of different armies there, and very few of them are really large armies. I'm not one of these people who has sort of 15 file boxes of things, but I've got quite a lot of armies which is of 100 to maybe sort of 300 of 28mm figures, or 2 or 3 box files of 6mm figures or 15mm figures or 2mm figures or whatever. They're not necessarily huge armies necessarily. There's other things that I've maybe done for 3 or 4 months and collected together quite enough to play a few games of it, enough to play a small campaign, and then nearly always there's another theme coming along in a different time period, and suddenly I've got to be the butterfly and move on to the next thing there. So quite often I'm trying to think what I have been gaming recently, because the May Land article I just wrote for the latest WSS. I don't know if you've seen that at all.
Yes.
I've been playing that through at the moment and trying to get together Afghans and things for that there, and just trying out the ideas there. There were a few Sudanese figures proxying in there at various points, but so I'm interested in getting some more stuff for Afghanistan now, because I was enjoying that so much. But the problem is there's always something else big around the corner that I'm always planning as well. So I've got a few projects on the go at the moment as well, which I keep getting distracted away from, because, like I say, Guy makes me write an article or something else different, and suddenly my attention is drawn away to something shiny and bright. Always dangerous as a wargamer, isn't it?
Well, as wargamers, we can resist anything but temptation. I think that's pretty much true for all of us, isn't it? Funnily enough, my most regular wargaming opponent, who's also a teacher, has just sent me some pictures through of some Northwest Frontier British that he's suddenly decided he's going to dive into for a sort of a Maiwand themed game. He is the inveterate hobby butterfly. It was Carlist Wars about 3 weeks ago that he spent a load of money on, and suddenly now he's got Northwest Frontier British, and he showed me some pictures of the Wargames factory, or Wargames, who is it? The Plastic Afghans. I can't quite remember which company.
The Atlantic ones, the Wargames Atlantic new ones, are they?
Yes.
Yeah, because of course Perry are bringing out some new ones too. So there's going to be suddenly out of nowhere two packs of plastic for those.
Yes.
If you really want to do it in 28mm, of course, there's lots of other scale available, as we well know.
Well, yes, funnily enough.
But I mean, the nice thing with it though is sometimes the figure ranges, come back around again, and that old dusty collection of Romans and Celts up in my loft suddenly has become very useful again with Infamy coming out. So we had a game of that the other week, which Richard Clark, who was on here a couple of episodes ago, will be pleased about.
Yes.
So it's very rarely wasted. If it's in a book somewhere and safely packed in a loft somewhere, then normally it can be reused again or used in a slightly different period with a little bit of a few extra additions or whatever. So. Just
on that Lard theme, then we discussed about come and have a go if you think you're lardy enough. Just tell us a little bit about that, because that's one of the several lardy themed days that go on across the country, aren't there? Obviously, in lockdown, we're struggling with it, and there's obviously virtual editions. Yeah,
I've run it twice now. I first sort of ran it originally because we had a few people down the club who were obsessed fans of Too Fat Lardy's games there, who I think wanted to showcase some of the things they were doing. And one of my mates down the club was basically having a really bad time of it. He was struggling in life generally. His wife wasn't particularly well, and I thought it'd be really good fun to bring all these people who I knew down to our club to play there. Because he'd always wanted to go off these other lard days and was never able to get out to them. So I thought, well, I'll tell you what, I'll organise it and keep it at the local club. And I was, to begin with, thought, oh, we'll get 30 people or so, and it'll be a nice small event, and it'll just about pay off the amount of the price of hiring the hall or whatever. And then for the first one, we got about 50 people in the first 2 days saying we're interested in playing. And I was like, God blimey, okay then. And then the first one ended up with about 60 people coming along to it in total, 58, something like that. And I thought, God, we're onto something here. And I deliberately sort of made it, I think it was £4 entry for a day's worth of lardy gaming there with free donuts and tea and coffee there, which frankly, I basically did it absolutely to not make money at all, but just as a break even and get as many people gaming as possible, really. And I think they had about 12 games for the first one there. And Richard came down to that along with Nick and Sydney as well. And then afterwards we went out for a big all-you-can-eat feast in Southampton, which was quite good fun. And then this year it has grown again. I think we got up to being I don't want to blow my own trumpet here too much, but I think it must be one of the largest days that's been run. I think we had 87 people coming to it. Wow. And in fact, we were quite fortunate, and we had it on May the 7th, which another week or two later we would have been in complete lockdown and the entire thing would have been closed now. Yes. In hindsight, probably looking at it, probably wasn't the best time to get 87 people together in a crowded hall, was it, and play games. But anyway, we had lots of fun, and it will probably be on again next year, but it really does depend on the circumstances with everything that's going on with the COVID-19 outbreak there and social distancing and things. We've started getting back to our normal club rooms where we hold the show, but we're all socially distancing at the moment, and we're fitting about half the number of people in, and we're hiring a more expensive hall, for example, at the moment. So suddenly, unfortunately, it's gone from being a fairly cheap place to hire through to something that's a bit pricier. So I'll have to have a rethink for next year a little bit. I'm not sure we're going to fit 87 people in there, although I'm sure, actually, in terms of people wanting to come and play inside it, the numbers will be huge again. But we might have to be a bit sensible about numbers for next year.
That's a particularly impressive number in view of the location, isn't it? With being on the south coast, if you're in the Midlands, then you can.
Well, we had people coming from a long way. Yeah. But I mean, Southampton is I know everybody says Nottingham's the spiritual heartland, or Newark or something is the spiritual heartland, but we're in Featherstone country down in Southampton. There's a lot of local groups around down here, and we've got probably about 1 million people in Hampshire itself. So there were probably about 40 or so people coming from Hampshire or from just into Sussex there. The furthest person, Charlie, came down from Scotland. He's up on the Scottish borders there, and a couple of chaps came all the way from Norway to come down and play, which was completely insane. And he loved it and said he's going to come back again next year, hopefully. So
fantastic.
Absolute madness. Some of these people here who want to go and play lardy games.
Well, I think as a whole, the hobby brings this out in us, doesn't it? That we'll travel for those games. I was speaking to Greg from Little Wars TV last year about how far the Americans travel for their convention fix, but they're generally there for 3 or 4 days, and it's they make a week out of it almost. Whereas people will travel for a 1 or 2 day convention to play lardy games in this country is quite unusual. If it's more than a 2-hour drive, then a lot of people get a little bit curmudgeonly.
Well, in fairness, I am as well. You see, that's why I lazily organised it on my doorstep. But I mean, that was part of the problem for me as well. Was that I'm divorced and I've got my kids most weekends at one of the days, and therefore the idea of actually taking a whole weekend away to go and do something actually quite often isn't possible. I've got a lot of marketing things to do at weekends and planning quite often during term time. And therefore, actually, I don't get whole weekends, but I get a day quite often. Yeah. And therefore, a 1-day lardy show at home or on local territory works for me. I do tend to go to shows mostly around the south of England. I do occasionally travel a bit further north and things. I go up to Newark normally once a year. Yeah. But it's a long old trek in the car. If I leave at 4:30, 5 in the morning, I'll get there for 8:30 to set up for a game. And then it's about a 4.5 hour journey home then. So, adding 8 hours onto your day by the time you've run a few participation games makes it quite a grueling one there. Luckily, I've got a few mates in Nottingham, so it's not quite so bad. I can sometimes stay over, but it's difficult to get out for these bigger days out there, and things like Joy of Six and things like that. There, I'd really like to get up to, but Sheffield is a 4.5, 5 hour journey there probably in the morning. So that does put me off a little bit. Really, that's the only problem with it.
It's that bit further on, isn't it, Sheffield?
It's just that next hour and a bit on the car, isn't it? So
exactly.
Yeah. Oh well, one day, hopefully next year.
Well, if it's running next year, I'm going to make an effort to get down south. I mentioned before we started that although I've lost the accent, or never had the accent actually, I was born in Southampton, so I feel as though some of that spirit of wargaming from the Featherstonian angle and the Neville Dickinson with the minifigs originating in Southampton must have infused me.
We had Neville actually turning up for the first. In fact, both of them he's turned up to actually. He's a friend of one of our members, and he occasionally comes. He's getting quite doddery. Yeah. He's into his mid-80s now, but he's a great old fella, still full of energy and ideas, and he still games actually once a week at my friend's shed.
Wow.
And he's still very active in terms of that there.
It's incredible.
He's Arthur Laguerre at the moment, I believe. So
okay. Well, that's a real connection with history, isn't it? Because minifigs being one of the original mass-produced figure companies.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a lovely touch. You mentioned Partisan there, and I think I mentioned about doing my due diligence around yourself, Mark, by doing a little Google search on you and finding the Siege of Siege of Portsmouth.
Siege of Portsmouth, yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Which was pretty well advertised around the interwebs when you did that. And I get to almost every Partisan, and that must have been one that I missed. So I was really disappointed to miss that. But just for those that don't know what we're talking about, tell us about that project.
Okay. Well, in edition 50, I'm going to say 56 now, or 55 of Wargames Old Strategy, must have been about one of the first couple of editions that we did since it was brought over by Jasper. I wrote some articles all about a series of connected battles all to do with the Siege of Portsmouth in 1642, which was one of the first battles of the English Civil War, well before Edge Hill and that kind of thing. Portsmouth basically declared for the king under Lord Goring, and then William Waller came down and besieged Portsmouth and captured Southsea Castle, and the city surrendered basically. But it was quite exciting in that lots of local places were involved inside it, and there were lots of funny, bizarre sort of anecdotes that you wouldn't maybe expect inside the English Civil War that took place inside it. So I thought it would make a fun setting for a campaign. And originally I wrote it to play with bigger scale figures, and actually having played out with the bigger scale figures, I suddenly realised that lots of the actions inside it required a really macro look really at the scenery and the sort of grand tactical situation. Quite a lot of ships involved inside it, bombarding the harbour and that there, which in 28mm is a bit tricky to recreate really properly. So I thought, well, a few years later, wouldn't it be fun to do it in 2mm? And literally the same week in which I planned out my order to a regular, Sidney Ramwood, on his blog, started to post up pictures of his 30-year war figures, and we got chatting there straight away. And I sort of was unsure if the 2mm figures would actually paint into anything that looked good. I'd seen a few pictures on the web that frankly looked like a car crash, and they were based in a rather old-fashioned style. I think a lot of people had used 2mm in the past because frankly nobody could see them, and therefore it didn't matter if they were badly painted. And I thought, well, actually I reckon I could do a pretty good job. I've seen Sydney's ones and they look good. So I brought a few armies of them, and I thought, I'll get together a game of that. And in the end, basically the game was a grand tactical siege with a table that represented the island of Portsmouth itself, Portsea Island, and then outside of it there were sort of lots of strategic zones that could be captured, so it became a sort of full campaign around Hampshire. And all the units inside it were recreated on a 1-to-1 scale. So there were about 900 people involved in the siege, and in 2mm, of course, that's very affordable. And the bases maybe consisted of 100, 150 figures in a base. So it was a good fun one to do. We ran it originally at colours, with a smaller version. And then the version you saw there was 2018 at Partisan, which was a sort of slightly sexed up, larger version of it, which had ports downhill on it and things like that there. And I'd added extra ships and things to make it come to life a little bit more and recreate the historical battle a bit better. And I had lots of what ifs inside it with different random cards that could crop up. So you could have relief forces coming to save the royalists in Portsmouth, and spies and fires and outbreaks of plague and shortages of ammunition and all kinds of sort of other things there to throw into the mix there to make it a little bit more random. So we ran that at Partisan, and it was really popular. It won the best participation prize that year, which was a real honour to get, and also really nice to, I suppose, showcase how good 2 mil can look if you actually spend the time to paint it nicely and do the scenery in particular, which I think a lot of people tend to just play it on a very flat surface with bits of felt put down and things, which is fine when you're down the club, but actually you can make it look a grand spectacle as well. Which is just as eye-catching, I think, as a huge 28mm game. The other thing we did with it quite a bit is we also made quite a lot of our own figures inside it as well, and a lot of scratch-built buildings and things. We used a lot of buildings from Brigade models. Is it Brigade model? Yeah, it's Brigade models.
Brigade,
yeah. I get them confused with Brigade games sometimes. Brigade models, they do the beautiful small-scale scenery figures, and we mixed in with it there some Langton ships. But a lot of the buildings inside it were just made out of very cheap bits of styrofoam offcuts from the underlay from underneath laminate floorboards.
Okay.
And a single sheet of that literally could cut a strip off, which was about sort of 5 mil wide, and shape the roofs and then paint them up, and you get lovely sort of sprawling cottages and things out there, which a lot of people really admired and looked really good. And also I scratch built out Porchester Castle as well on it, which a lot of people were really transfixed by. But in 2 mil, you see, you can make a Porchester Castle in 28mm. It would take me a year and a half's project probably, and it would take up the entire size of my kitchen area.
Yeah.
Whereas in 2 mil, I could make it so it's 12 centimeters by 6 centimeters or something, and I made it in an afternoon and painted it, and
really.
It just looked fantastic, and that's the real advantage of the smaller 2 mil stuff, is you can make a village in an afternoon and paint it, or you can make a baggage train with 40 wagons on it and a load of stragglers and baggage guards and things. You just simply can't do that in the bigger scales and recreate those things sensibly on the tabletop without spending king's ransom, and also having the space to fit it in as well. So if you want those sort of things on your tabletop, I think going small, be it 6 mil or 2 mil or 3 mil or whatever, is really the way to do it if you want to have those sort of features in your battles.
Funnily enough, I was listening to the Oddcast earlier today, and they were talking about terrain and how a church in 28mm can pretty much take up half the table. Yeah. If it's in the chain of command sort of games, at the ground scale that Chain of Command is played at, a church can be half the table. And really, unless that church is the focus of the game, so maybe playing the Eagle Has Landed, that sort of scenario.
Sure.
You can't just have it as something to look nice to one side. Whereas in the smaller scales, absolutely, whether it's 10 mil down, you can have that church as that little set piece which is off to one side, draws all that attention, but isn't perhaps the main focus of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing with it is you can also have like a whole string of villages. I mean, most historical battles aren't fought inside one village, are they?
No.
Quite often they're spread out over several miles, I mean, something like Waterloo we talked about earlier on is a fairly small battlefield, only a couple of miles across, but a lot of battlefields, particularly, I know you're a big fan of World War I things, you go to the Somme or something and you've got a front line of 20, 25 miles there,
Yeah, exactly.
And in 2 mil or something, you can create that sense of scale. I mean, I didn't actually quite do it to a proper ground scale. If I'd have done Portsmouth to a proper ground scale, it still would have been 28 foot long.
Really?
But I did it on a, exactly. Yeah, I know that's a small island really. But we played it on a 6 foot by 4 foot table and got Portsmouth in and the near surroundings, actually on the tabletop itself. And I'm planning as well at the moment. I'm planning, and it's getting built very slowly. A Constantinople 1453 game as well, which I've been posting up lots of pictures on Twitter about. I brought all the foam in for that, but unfortunately my house has just gone on the market, and I've had to tidy it all away sensibly to try and not deter off any potential buyers at the moment. But the plan is, as soon as I get into the new house, the garage will be turned into a giant Constantinople reconstruction inside there. I've got most of the buildings sort of ready to go, all the big buildings. It's a case of flashing it all out there with the large bits of walls and the other buildings to go with that. But that's going to be an 8 foot by 6 foot, the plan is for that.
8 by 6,
which in 2 mil is suddenly recreating. It's a big area, basically. It's all of medieval Constantinople, the Golden Horn, Galata on the other side, with the Bosporus, and a bit of the Marmara Sea in it as well. So it should be a fully sort of naval and land-based campaign around 1453 in the centre of Constantinople. So that's going to be quite epic.
Is that something you're looking to take to a show similar
I think so. I'm not going to build that just for the fun of it, just for me to play on my own in the garage. No, that's definitely one for shows. The plan is to make that a participation game. Sydney's meant to be helping me with that at the moment, but he's been a bit distracted by other things. But I'm hoping we'll get together and start knocking at the troops. I've painted about 20,000 figures for it, which I've been making myself in 2 mil. But we're going to need about 80,000 Ottomans and about 7,000 Byzantines to defend it. So I've still got quite a few more to make, but it's well on the way, really. I think once I really get cracking with it and I get settled with it, I should be okay. I'm on summer holidays for the next couple of weeks, so I'm hoping I might be able to break the back of it a little bit.
They're impressive numbers they are, Mark, that you just casually threw out there.
Well, the aim is to play it in 1-to-1 scale again. So I say 1-to-1 scale. I mean, when I use 2 mil blocks, they literally are blocks of figures rather than individual figures inside them. But you can roughly count the number of rows and the number of ranks inside it and work out a rough estimate of how many they're meant to be. I'm going to try and do it like that. And then in terms of ships, I'm going to do it slightly less ships than would have been there. I'm going to do it with about 30 or 40 ships in it. In 1 to 1,200 scale to go with it. So slightly smaller. Historically, there were probably about 100 ships involved into the siege itself, but I think getting a third of the number of ships still gives a fairly good representation of that anyway. And I've been really fortunate as well because I've got a few friends who've been helping me with 3D printers. John Matthews in particular, who's my mate in the Isle of Wight, has been fantastic. He's been designing lots of the buildings in Constantinople for me and giving me masters of those. And then another mate of mine called Wolfie has been casting them or printing them off. Sorry, how old-fashioned. Printing them on his printers for me in huge numbers. So I've got about 4.5 foot's worth of Constantinople's triple walls and things out there to put on it and things. So yeah, it's getting together quite nicely, but it's slow going. That's the only problem. The triple wall sections are taking me about an hour and a half per inch of wall. And I've got 4 foot of them to do. And I've done about 1.5 foot of them so far.
Okay, mate. Well, that sounds like it's decent progress so far.
Oh, it's decent progress. It just needs me to actually just put in the time really into it really, and dedicate a few days of just solidly destroying my eyeballs and squinting. I think. Yeah.
You mentioned there about sculpting your own figures. Now I've seen pictures of this process on Twitter, and the effect is pretty stunning. I don't think that's. I think that's an appropriate word to use. Just talk me through that. How did you get into that mindset?
It was partly because in a regular, when we were doing the Siege of Portsmouth game, they did some lovely little sculpts inside it, but there were lots of things they were missing out for campaigns that I wanted to make. So all the units inside it are very formed up in very clear formations and 3 ranks and 30 frontage or something. And what I wanted things that didn't quite fit that mould there of formed troops. So, for example, I wanted to add some refugees coming out of Portsmouth. I wanted to add inside it objectives. One of the key things that happened inside the siege was that at the very start of it, before Parliament effectively locked down the island of Portsmouth, Goring sent out his troops to try and round up all the local livestock. So in fact, at the start of the campaign, actually, part of the aim of the royalists really is to bring in as many provisions as possible from the local area, and bring in herds of sheep and cows and things out there. So then brought into all the ditches around the city of Portsmouth itself to use them as a source of food. So I had lots of tokens for that being made, and I thought, I'll try and make them out of green stuff. And to begin with, they were quite blobby. I mean, a floppy sheet basically in 2 mil isn't a huge amount of detail in it. There really is some. But part of the trick with it is, if you actually look at my sculpted figures, they're quite often sort of quite big blobs, really. I'd like to imagine what they look like from the air. If you ever get an aerial photograph of a riot or a football stadium crowd or something like that, the sort of distance that you're away from, I suppose, a battlefield looking down there as a war gamer, maybe, you're getting very much a bird's or helicopter's view of it.
Yeah.
So a lot of it's really in the paint job, and what I do is very simply I sort of give everything a black undercoat inside it, and I just try and pick out some of the main colours inside it. And it really tricks your eye into believing that there's a lot more going on inside it than anything else, really. Just the same way as I suppose you see a formation of people, if you see a reenactment from a long way away, you don't see all the detail of all the things going on inside it, you just pick out certain features like the shields. Well, that was the idea, was just trying to create something a little bit different from normal, and also really try and think, how would they fight on these bigger formations that you very rarely get shown in the larger scales? And in some sort of sense also of just the sheer numbers involved as well as these battles that sometimes can't come across, really. So I started sculpting them really as much as anything else for fun, really, to begin with, and I thought, what could I do with these? And then for the last about 2 or 3 years, I've been moaning about it on the podcast, actually, for WSS, and I keep trying to play around with different ideas for a set of rules for these, and none of them quite work. I keep pinching ideas off other rule sets and trying to sort of glue them together. And unfortunately, the end result often looks just like sort of some sort of dangerous as a bastard monster, really, of all these horrible bits glued together that I liked. Yeah. And it's sort of like the Frankenstein thing doesn't really quite work properly at the end of it all, and I curse it and I go back to the drawing board again. But just recently I've started getting that actually working for the first time, really properly in games that I'm happy with. So I've started developing a set of rules there called Homunculus Est, which is a name taken from when I used to do Latin at school. And inside the stories inside it there used to call people, Caecilius Est in Horto or something, would shout out sort of rude insults to people. And Caudex Est was, you're a blockhead. And Homunculus Est was, you're a small man. And I thought, what's an appropriate name in Latin for a game in which you are a very small general somewhere, controlling a massive army of people.
What I remember of Latin is being taught the insults and the rude words. They were always the most interesting bit for me, to be honest.
Yes, all the sort of subjectives and things like that there, it went over my head as well, to be honest with you. But yes, the insults are the things that have stuck with me as well. So Homunculus, the idea behind that is it's going to be a sort of a fast play, big battle system, in which commanders don't worry about small tactical units. They're not worried about cohorts of 500 men. They're interested in really what legions are doing, or sort of whole tribes of warriors and things. And I suppose the idea is a bit like inside DBA, maybe, where you have that sort of that abstraction of units, but maybe represented on something a bit more accurate, rather than sort of 4 figures representing a war band. We've got literally sort of 7,000-8,000 warriors on a base there moving around, And as a general, you don't see individual fights, but you see the sense of, right, are they going forwards? Are they going backwards? Are they running away? Does it all look okay? And I've been, like I say, cobbling together lots of other rules. I'm not very creative when it comes to actually writing my own rules from scratch there, really, but I've sort of skimmed and lots of different rule sets together and sort of cobbled the bits I like out of them. And at the moment, I've sort of pinched a few things from sort of square bashing from Peter Pig, and to the strongest, with that sort of idea of the squares there for movement around quite quickly. And I've nicked some bits out of Blood Bowl as well. Have you ever played Blood Bowl?
Oh, yes.
You have? Yeah. So the idea is sort of the initiative jumping from side to side as you mess up, basically. So I quite like this sort of idea of the chaos and confusion of a battle and people seizing the initiative. I know that was using Crossfire as well. So I've sort of pinched that system out of it there. So when something stuffs up, suddenly your turn might come to a very immediate end, and it might then swap over onto the other side, which has been quite good fun. Anyway, it needs lots more play testing, and I've got a few mates there who are helping out with that. Again, for old Sydney, it's his birthday in a few days' time, so we're going to give him a birthday bash for his birthday over the internet.
Really?
While he hides away in Roundwood Towers. And also another mate of mine, Kurt Campbell, who's over in Canada as well, is going to come and play that. And I've managed to rope in Guy and people out there to go and play a few games, hopefully, as well.
Fantastic.
And because it's all on the grid as well, I've sent people top-down photographs of all my units.
Yeah.
So they can literally print them on their printers and stick them onto cardboard and then play it on a grid of their size, of their choice, in their front room or whatever. So in fact, they could be playing it with little tiny units of even smaller than 2mm figures representing it, or they could be playing it at full size and say, I'm playing it on my dining room table or whatever.
That's interesting. I've for many years I've been part of the playtest team for Peter Pig, so Square Bashing was one of the games that I assisted with. I'm a bit like you. I'm not very creative with anything really, to be honest, but rules writing in particular. I'm not one of these people who can come up with new things, but I'll always throw my thoughts into something that's already been created. So Peter Pig in fact, almost all their rule sets now are grid based to a certain extent or another. So I think particularly for those online games, it's a godsend, isn't it? Because there's no
there's no ambiguity inside the measurement there, or somebody sort of cheating and saying, well, you didn't spot the fact that another half an inch or something extra and you'd have got the charge in or something. It's very clear cut. So, that'll certainly help if we're playing games online and things.
Yeah.
But it also just speeds up movement and play as well. And the nice thing with this set of rules I'm making here is that you've maybe got 10, 12 units aside who are all based on a single base for movement. So in fact, you can actually play a turn through in about 3 or 4 minutes, potentially.
Right.
In fact, you could actually play it against a stop clock as well, which is something else worth considering adding into the rules there.
Yeah, to chivvy along those people who
to make fast decisions there.
Yeah.
And the speed of the actual dice rolls and things, it's all done on the die sixes and things like that. Therefore, it's pretty straightforward. There's not too many tables of stuff to be looking at, but it's not like those Bruce Quarry rules where, +3 if it's a Wednesday and -2 if it's a 10-degree slope or something. It's a little bit more sort of abstracted than that really, and the speeding up there. But hopefully, what I've tried to do there is capture some of the key sort of elements that are important for winning an ancient battle, and also cutting out some of the tactical flexibility that I think some of the other ancient war games have that I don't think a real historical general would have had. But at the same time, I'm hoping to, and our playtesters might tell me something completely different, still capture some of the fun of it being a good fun game, and there still being choices inside it to make as a general, albeit ones that are maybe fairly limited in terms of, you can't do absolutely everything you want to do, or, detach a single cohort to go and move around the flank of somewhere. You've got to think in a much larger way, in the same way as a proper Roman or Gallic chieftain might have to do in a battle conditions, maybe.
We've got to remember that fun aspect, haven't we? Certainly. You've just come back to that point now that I was going to bring back about what we are actually representing on the table. Are we representing that unit leader who, as well as being the overall commander, or what, where do we pitch that sort of command level? And I think with the smaller scales particularly, and we'll come on to talk about 6mm very shortly, in those grand tactical games, you have to remember that the guy at the front of one of your barbarian mobs hasn't necessarily got radio contact with the overall commander who's sitting on a hill.
He certainly doesn't have radio contact. So he'd be lucky to have a trumpet, wouldn't he, really?
Exactly. So best he might have a trumpet, or he's going to point his big stick and point them down to go in a certain direction. And pretty much once they're on the way, that's it.
They're on their way,
and there's no recalling them or much else in a subtle kind of way. So I think that's really important to remember, isn't it?
Yeah, if you're going to start recalling stuff and the entire front line's going to hear the blast of your trumpet, and the whole lot of them are going to move back, not individual units and things. So it should hopefully capture something a bit more like what a general might have experienced. Although I'm always a bit wary of the fact that a war game can ever be truly representative of what a real battle's like. Well, at the end of the day, it can capture some elements of it and maybe give you some empathy with what it might have been like. And I think you can learn something from that, but it's not necessarily an entirely a complete recreation of that battle there and the same experiences. And neither would I want it to be there. An ancient battlefield would have been a terrifying place.
Pretty much any battlefield, mate, to be honest.
It's horrific, So I'm very pleased to be sitting here playing with little soldiers and, throwing them in the bin afterwards. Sweep the table, not doing it with real people's lives.
It's one of those. It's one of those discussions that wargamers occasionally have, isn't it, about understanding what it is that you're representing, but not trying to get too bloodthirsty about it, and understanding what you're trying to represent, I guess. And certainly Martin Goddard at Peter Pig, who is the principal rules writer for their set of rules, will always aim to have 4 or 5 aspects of whatever particular conflict he's looking to represent, and get those on the table, and design the mechanisms around those to represent them, and also include that fun element, because we've got to enjoy it, haven't we?
Absolutely.
You can't feel like we've actually been in that front line of whatever conflict it is. We need to enjoy it. It's a social aspect. It's a social event. We have a social contract with the persons that are on the other side of the table, so that we both enjoy the game, and not have this win at all costs aspect. It's about having a joint experience to recreate what it is. And if you win, all the better. But you can.
Yeah, absolutely. You want a degree of competitiveness, but I mean, the aim of these rules here really isn't. I put a point system inside it, much against my better judgment. Really, I much prefer scenarios where historical side lines up, and if that means it's asymmetrical and you've got a challenge in your hands, then all the better, frankly.
Yes.
I mean, hopefully it'll be an experience, and you never know. You might even see it in print at some point there, or it might just go into a dusty computer file somewhere and never see the light of day ever again. But
well, that was going to be the next question. Will we see this? Is this something that will commercially be available?
Well, possibly at some point now. I need to work it out a little bit. I'm always dreaming of the sort of the retirement plan, getting out of teaching and doing something within wargaming, really, to sort of
doing a proper job.
But at the end of the day, it doesn't pay the bills
No.
so well. Don't get me wrong. There's the odd couple of quid in there for the figures I buy and things. But it is, it's not really a long-term plan in terms of a full-time job. I can't do it like Richard Clark will be doing it. I don't think I've got the skill to be able to sell 10,000 copies of a set of rules even before it's been published or something crazy like that.
Yeah. No world domination plans just yet, then.
Not quite yet, Sean. But we've got to start small and work our way up there. I might dip my toe in the water maybe next year if I can find somebody to help me publish it, maybe, and I get it to a stage which I'm happy with it, really. I've written enough sets of rules inside War Games magazines. It's funny seeing the feedback you get from different people, and some people love some of the things I've written, and some people write back and pick holes inside it. I'm not a great rules lawyer sort of person who can perfectly sort of set out a set of rules. A lot of my ideas tend to be sort of quite wacky ones there, and sometimes people pick up on little sort of nuances inside them that don't quite work. And I say, well, the whole point of the set of rules in the War Games magazine was more to give me some ideas to go away and be inspired, rather than to playlist to the nth degree and pick it apart for a competitive set of rules or something.
Well, that goes back to that creativity bit that I was talking about earlier on, getting away from those 4 M's of movement, missiles, melee, morale. Unless people try different things and come at it from a different angle, or come up with some revolutionary new mechanism and give it a go and put it out there, then not everyone will work, will it? But you might just find that one thing that from that something great grows. So,
well, I think
more power to your elbow, mate.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, though, who do the successful rules tend to just come up with one really creative new idea, and then there's a lot of old familiar mechanisms on it that they'll add around it. And actually, you don't want a set of rules that's so out of the box that you feel uncomfortable with every single phase inside the game. You want to be familiar and sort of know roughly, or a 4+ is a hit or something, and learn those ones quickly at the start, and then maybe have one, or as you say, 1 or 2 things you focus on, like Martin Goddard, you were saying earlier on, picks the area and says, well, what are the key things that we need to develop here? And I think probably that's the way I wanted to be with this set here, really. But And like I say, we'll see. I'm a bit tentative about it, but you never know. You might just see them at some point there. I mean, the part of the problem with it is, let's face it, how many people have got huge 2mm armies to go and play with, or 6mm or 3mm or whatever. There's quite a few 6mm ones out there, but it'd be interesting to see if I can convert a few more people to the smaller scales.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that moves us on nicely to the next point, because we are. It's branded as a 6mm podcast, but I did say very early on that I'm not adverse to talking about other scales in that smaller arena, something below 15mm really. Because there's been very little attention over the years, whether it's in magazines, whether it's demo games that we see at conventions, whether it's discussion on podcasts, in fact. And I know that Meeple's talked about it from time to time. I know Neil did some Napoleonics back in the day, but it doesn't seem to have had or gained a lot of traction over and above what Peter Berry would do whenever he was a guest on a podcast or when he's evangelizing at a show. There doesn't seem to have been much inertia or momentum with inertia was the wrong word, sorry. Momentum.
Inertia, really.
Much momentum, I think, amongst it. And that's partly why I started the podcast, really, to generate that discussion about how you creatively you could get with 6mm.
But I think that's been really good for the hobby, hasn't it? Do something specifically 6mm like that. And again, Pete Berry's Joy of 6 has gone from being a small show with half a dozen tables into something which has really grown now into being the Verse 6mm show, which everybody knows about there. It's getting some fantastic tables. I think the key thing is the quality of the games inside it as well. It's fantastic. They could be winners at Salute any year, really, couldn't they? These ones here you see. And I think it's really good to give some of these wonderful 28mm games, which are huge and sprawling with beautifully painted figures, a run for their money, and show that, in fact, it doesn't really matter what the scale is. If it's delivered well with somebody who's researched into it and put the time and effort into painting the troops there, it can look just as good, if not, I think, somewhat better. Particularly if you can get a better representation of the actual battle with a number of figures involved. So I think it's great to see things like Joy of 6 there getting so much attention now. Inside magazines, I'm seeing more of it, but there's still that barrier, which I think comes down to not necessarily the editors, actually, but more actually a shortage of articles from some people there. And I do try and write smaller articles, or ones that can represent smaller scale figures. In fact, quite early on in my WSS days, I wrote something all about why 6mm figures were fantastic, and we would always be playing with 6mm all the time there. I'm not sure quite how many converts that got, probably.
Well, I remember the article, definitely.
But, it wasn't just simply tokenism. At that point, they had painted up 3 or 4 massive, great big rapier armies of ancient figures there, some Macedonians and ancient Indians and Persians and Greeks and things, and Republican Romans, and they still come out quite regularly. A lot of the scenarios I write for the magazine, which are ancient ones, I often play them in 6mm as the scale of choice, because I can get it out and I can play it in a smaller space. And also, I tend to have the troops for a really good variety of troops for lots of different ancient periods in the classical world. So it's quite gameable, and if I want to buy another division of troops, another sort of 100 horsemen or whatever, it's quite affordable, and I can paint them in a few afternoons rather than it being something that's going to take me the rest of the year, and it's a huge project and half of my loft space. So 6mm is for me a really, really useful scale to be using. For ancient battles, I'll use it, and also we've been doing some Kriegsspiel games as well. Okay. In fact, we did it at Come and Have a Go If You Think You're Larder. We did a big Kriegsspiel game of Ekmor, in which we used 6mm figures from Commission Miniatures, the MDF company there.
Oh, yes.
And we put them all on little bases with little national flags on them rather than the usual sort of flock and static grass jobs, and with little name tags on the back of them, and each one of those was a brigade of soldiers. And that was a great way of getting together lots of pretty 6mm tokens there to represent these huge, great big corps fighting out in 1809 in Austria and Bavaria, which was a really, really good way of doing it. But I think the big problem really is getting good photographs and getting those in there. Guys often quite keen on, in WSS at least anyway, getting more 6mm stuff in it. But very simply, a lot of the photographs we get in aren't of the quality that is good enough to be printed in the magazine. And unfortunately, very good, sharp quality photography really sells magazines for nicely painted figures. The problem is, I think we've got a lot of very, very good 6mm armies out there that look beautiful, but actually getting the photographs with all the figures in focus and getting the depth of field when you've got the serried ranks of 6mm figures is actually really quite tricky. It requires a degree of photography skill that I don't really have. And normally you need to have the right setup, you need to have the stand, you need to have the lighting right, you need to have a delay on the camera there, and sort of longer exposure time to cut out that depth of field problem, so that everything's in focus. And very few gamers, unfortunately, take that quality photographs of their collections. In fact, I'm still learning myself, and very regularly I'll take pictures of 6mm things or 2mm things, and I'll send them into the magazine, and they get rejected quite often, actually, unfortunately, not because they're not well painted and beautiful figures, just purely because my photography skills with my camera phone aren't up to what's required in the magazine, really. So if there's one tip out there, if you want to get more 6mm stuff into the magazines, really, I know we've got some great figure painters out there and some beautiful armies and some wonderful terrain setups, but getting those photography skills down to a T would be really, really useful, I think.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because there are good pictures out there. I'm always an advocate to look at some of the pictures that Peter takes of his figures, for instance, particularly in the set pieces, where he's got some of the scenery there, and troops moving through it. But I think you're absolutely right. Overall, the quality of the pictures is lacking. And the magazines rely upon the pretty pictures, don't they? As much as the words.
Yeah, I mean, they're the things actually, when people pick it up in WHS, they'll look at the pictures first. They won't read the articles. I could be writing a load of nonsense inside it, but if the pictures are pretty, people will probably be happy with it. I mean, the other thing is that also, from my eye, what I think is a good photograph, and looks quite nice to the magazine, people like Christie who do WSS and do the sort of, the setting, the layout and things out of it there. She'll pick out problems with photographs that I wouldn't have even noticed.
Right.
Because they're real experts at this kind of thing here. Whereas, unfortunately for the amateur, untrained eye, you're not necessarily going to spot some of these problems in the photographs that she'll be spotting for it. So quite often, like I say, I'll send in a photograph that looks really good to me, and it just simply isn't up to standard. So, we really do need to up our game in terms of that there. But, I don't think we're adverse to having them, and I'm sure other magazines are quite keen on getting 6mm stuff in it as well. I know, Dan up at War Games Illustrated has also said how keen he is to get 6mm inside the magazine more, as well there. And I think just the more we can get it on show, the better. Yeah. But it's been really nice on things like Twitter and Facebook to be seeing so much on social media actually in recent years. I think really increasing, and I think that's raising people's awareness of the scale, and people are experimenting with it and realising you can do some great stuff in 6mm and 2mm and 3mm, and there's some of the stuff from 10mm from Pendragon and things like that. It's absolutely stunning at the moment. I think the quality of the painting on that is mind blowing.
Yeah, agreed. I think perhaps also we have the issue where people look at these really fantastic pictures in magazines by some of the real premium painters in the hobby of the 28mm stuff, and that is almost set as the standard, isn't it, of how you need to paint your figures. And not everybody can be a Kevin Dallimore or Jim Ibbotson or whoever it is who's producing some of the really top draw work at the moment in 28mm. Yes, that sells the figure, but then when you get the figure in front of you and you start painting it and it feels like you're using a 3-inch brush, and you think, oh my God, this looks nothing like the image that I've seen of a 28. And it's the same with the 6mm, I guess, that some of the real top draw stuff that we're seeing in 6mm or 10mm or your own stuff in 2mm, people can get a bit of stage fright almost, I guess, a little bit concerned that their own product isn't up to standard and therefore they might get disheartened and move on or whatever, as opposed to realising that there's a journey to be had in learning these techniques to paint and present your figures, in the basing, and that it doesn't really. If my figures aren't award-winning figures, it doesn't matter.
No, once you play the game,
yeah,
it doesn't
once
matter,
they're on
does
the
it,
table, once they're on the table, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because viewed at arm's length is always my benchmark. It's almost everybody's benchmark, isn't it? You don't want to hold it up under your nose and scrutinise it. There's few people who paint figures that can have their figures held up under your nose, and you say, yeah, that's an absolutely top draw paint job. It's that arm's length view, isn't it? I guess. Yeah,
I'll have to root out some pictures of my old heroics and Ross stuff when I was an impoverished sixth former. He couldn't afford anything, and I remember painting up all the little 1 to 300 tanks and figures for that there.
Yes.
I think they were decidedly mediocre in their paint jobs on them. So I'm sure if I showed that and said, look, this is where it went to and this is how it's improved, really it's just practice, it's technique on it and that kind of thing there. And there is a lot of stuff now online about how to paint figures and make them better. And certainly with the 2mm stuff, a lot of people say, oh, how can you paint it so small as that? And I'm just like, well, it really is down to technique. There's nothing accurate in terms of me filling in, the spaces properly with my paintbrush. It's very impressionistic, I suppose, rather than it being precise.
I do sometimes think, that when people talk about how can you paint anything so small, that they expect they'll see something that's really well painted, like your own stuff in 2mm or the 6mm stuff, and if they pick it up and get a magnifying glass, that we'll see buttons and turnbacks and edging and piping. I think that's what they, in their mind's eye, they're thinking you will get, but you don't, because it's impression, isn't it?
It's all about impressions, yeah, absolutely.
And it's using that black space as much as the colour that you put.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it was funny with that. I was talking about the Portchester Castle model earlier on, and the keep inside that was literally a single block of balsa or something like that there. And a lot of people went, oh, did you sculpt all those little tiny castellations go up and down? And I said, no, I drew them on with a fine liner pen up and down. They were black and the bits in between it. Right, and then I used a little tiny white highlight underneath all the windows that I painted on and all the castellations, as if the light was catching on the angles on it.
Yeah, yeah.
And the people looked at it and went, oh, are they all sculpted on? And no, it's just a completely flat block of square of wood there. And it's sort of a really simple technique, and you didn't need to be actually a genius to do it in terms of the actual skill involved in drawing these lines. You needed a steady hand, but it wasn't like I was doing some sort of, 5-shade sort of a blending method with beautiful ink washes and that kind of thing. It was very simplistic. Yeah. But because the eye saw the light and saw the contrast between it captured it and imagined that there was something there that wasn't there at all.
Yes.
So you can be really clever with small figures, and you can really trick people's eyes and imaginations completely into thinking there's all kinds of things that are there that aren't there at all.
Yeah, it's smoke and mirrors, isn't it? I think that there's tricks and techniques that you can learn to help that presentation. And that works pretty much in 28mm. I can always remember the old saying, "It's faces and bases."
That's it, yeah. Faces and bases, yeah.
Yeah. And I think in 6mm and lower, it almost comes down to basing, doesn't it?
I was going to say, but basing is a thing, actually. And so many times I've seen some really nicely painted 6mm figures on some shocking bright green sort of nasty 1970s sort of railway flock.
Yes.
Bases. And you look at it and go, oh my gosh, that's horrible.
Yeah.
And equally, I've seen some pretty awful painted 6mm figures on quite nicely done bases, which... from a gaming distance, look absolutely stunning until you get up close and realise that, in fact, they're, look a dog's dinner.
Yeah.
So, I mean, things like Pete Berry doing that sort of basing system from Backhouse is, I think, been really good at saying to people, actually, you don't need to be a basing genius to actually get a pretty good standard of basing that looks tidy and nice and from a distance looks absolutely fantastic on a tabletop.
Something I'm struggling with at the moment, and I don't know if you can sympathise with this or understand where I'm coming from, is with the base. I love the Peter Berry, the Backhouse basing system. That's great, but very often that will clash with the cloth or the table that you're putting them on. So mats and blankets and teddy bear fur and this sort of fleece blankets are all the rage at the moment, aren't they? That you can buy these commercially made ones, or you can make your own. But not very often do you see the base of the figure actually have any sort of blending into the ground.
Yeah, I mean, that was part of the thing I did with the Siege of Portsmouth game, was I made a really conscious choice to try and make sure that the landscape around it and all the flock used inside it was going to try and match up with the actual figures and their bases. I think it really does make a difference. And I know Per Broden was on the other day, and of course he's sort of the master of blending in the figures into the train there, and they look absolutely sort of at home inside it, don't they? You know, they look sort of very natural onto the huge, great big sort of landscapes that he produces.
To be honest, it was your Siege of Portsmouth game that made me think of that point. For that very reason, the village, the towns and villages, and all the extra bits that you've got there, it absolutely blends into it looks like it's the same basic material across everything.
It was a wide variety of different things, really. I just used all the railway woodland scenic stuff, which is all sort of very natural colours and that kind of thing there. And sort of blended that all in there. And I know you were talking the other day when you were out for your walk, talking about what grass looks like underneath bases and that kind of thing. I use the same sort of basing technique really as 28mm figures. I use sharp sand, PVA down, and then that painted brown all over, and then dry brushed in a sort of creamy colour to look like sort of chalky, sort of dried out earth. And then I use a mixture of sort of woodland scenics, fine scatter, I think it is. And then with the little clump foliage and things like that on it there. And I'd pretty much do the same thing in 6mm as well, but I sometimes use the grass tufts as well.
Oh, yeah.
For a slightly sort of more arid look to it there, a little bit rougher. And I use a few more of the bigger stones and stuff on the 6mm figures. And that creates a really nice Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, sort of Indian, Afghanistan sort of a landscape there, which I use normally on like desert basing quite often for the landscape thing I fight it over, but it tends to blend in with all kinds of different things. So you were sort of talking the other day, why don't we just sort of grass over all our figures? And I suppose the advantage of that mixture of sort of different scenic materials on bases tends to blend it in with a lot of the bases a lot more effectively. Whereas I think if they were grass all over, they would stand out like a sore thumb against that a little bit more. I suppose it disguises the shape of them a little bit more.
It's that conundrum, isn't it, that we want to have that multi-use. And really, it was just to be a bit thought-provoking, I think, about that, the thing about the basing, because it's pretty much ubiquitous across all scales, and it has been for years now, that you have this browny, sandy earth base with bits of static grass dotted around, and now, obviously, the clump foliage things that the many nature tufts or whatever, the tufts that we stick on, which have been around for 5, 6, 7 years, I guess. And when I was walking through that field, I'm thinking, well, it doesn't really look what I'm walking across here. And there's that point that once 10,000 men have marched across it, then it will start to look a little bit
looking trampled. Yeah, I think also the light base is also really important. It's framing the figure as well.
Yeah.
So it's to do with colour and picking out the person on that there and the model on it a little bit carefully. So it's an artistic another artistic trick, isn't it? There, rather than it being an accurate recreation. But it's in the same way as we probably over highlight our 28mm figures too, don't we?
Yes.
To make them stand out, and you capture your light along the blade of the sword or something there. If you want to make it shine in that way there and stand out from 3 feet away. But actually, in real life, maybe the highlights are somewhat dulled down in comparison.
Yes.
But, you exaggerate those deliberately for effect, don't you?
Well, I think if we painted our figures as they would have appeared in reality, pretty much everything would be brown, wouldn't it?
Yeah, covered in shit and mud, wouldn't they, basically, So, it would be a pretty dull game, wouldn't it, really?
It would be, mate, yeah. We've talked about Per, and Per has a community project on the go.
Yeah.
Which you were invited to take part in.
Yeah, I've been roped into that, yeah. So you've talked about this a little bit before, but Per basically is a replacement for Joy of 6. Decided it'd be nice to do something as a community project to celebrate 6mm scale figures and to get a bit more I suppose, attention given to them there. So he's designed this project. I think it's got about 40 gamers inside it. Is that right?
Something like that.
I mean, 43, 44 gamers inside it, and basically, Pete Berry from Backhouse has provided some 2 armies in 6mm, roughly sort of based around Great Northern War, sort of 9 Years' War era, the end of the 17th century, early 18th century, and with 2 fictional sides involved inside it, which for some reason he roped in myself and Sydney to be the monarchs of. So I'm King Marcus Backhouse or something.
We're on the same side, by the way.
Oh, we were blues, hurrah.
Yes, we're blues.
Denswee.
Denswee, yes.
An anagram of Sweden.
Yes.
So I got through the post of a couple of little packs of really beautiful command figures from Bacchus, and Per sent me along a few extras as well there. And I don't know how many I painted, and then probably about 16, 20 figures, something like that there. All the high command, which was a rather a privilege, I have to say, to get to paint the fancy high command there, which was very nice. And I had great fun painting those actually, and it was nice because I only had a small number to paint. I could really lavish detail on them in a way which I might not ordinarily do to an ordinary unit. So to paint the Royal Standard and things like that there with 2 or 3 layers of highlights on the different features, and it was quite good fun.
Yeah, you did quite a good job, and I think I posted I'm giving up at that point.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, see, this is what you're saying early on. So nice paint jobs are, going to scare people off. But as Per said, once you start basing it all in the same way and on the tabletop, it'll all look cracking there, really. So I think the plan is then that we're going to be facing up against the Russian beast of Sydney Roundwood, although I can't quite remember what his fictional country's called.
It doesn't matter. They're going to lose.
It's another anagram of Russia or something, isn't it?
Yeah,
Anyway,
it doesn't matter.
Yeah, he's going to be playing with his son there, the young protege, Max there, a few games with these armies, once they're all based up and they've all been sent to him, and blogging about them on his Roller One website.
Yeah.
And then the plan is then to flog them for charity as well.
Well, that's a real good cause, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think for combat stress there. So it's nice to get a bit of publicity for 6mm stuff. Nice to help Per out because he's a good mate of mine.
Yeah.
But I play the odd Kriegspiel with Per.
Oh, okay.
Online. We sometimes we've been playing a few games on Twitter, just using sort of DMing messages.
Yeah.
And we had him chasing around Indians around the reservations in the 1860s inside a campaign last year, which he quite enjoyed playing in. And he was a sort of a Quaker sort of preacher, sort of converted to being sort of a cavalry officer who had all kinds of sort of qualms about the terrible treatment of the Indians on the reservations.
Okay.
And he was sort of juxtaposed with another character there. He was loosely based around a very popular politician. Oh no, I say popular. Maybe not popular actually. An infamous British politician during the Brexit debates there. He was something of a sabre rattler. Who sort of claimed that he'd fought in lots of wars and knew how to deal with the Indians all the time. I'm not going to bring politics into this too much, but anyway, Major Francois was a good fun character to sort of contrast him with anyway. And basically, we're trying to deal with Little Crow's rebellion in Minnesota, and with hilarious consequences most of the time. Yeah, so that was good. So we played that as an online Kriegspiel together, and we also played one a few months ago in lockdown. We had a game based around the Isle of Wight being raided during the 100 Years' War by the French and Spanish, which we played through as well. Which Per was the commander of the garrison on the Isle of Wight, trying to get together lots of local militia units to try and face off the French and Spanish forces, again with hilarious consequences most of the time. So. Yeah, he's a good egg, is Per, and full of enthusiasm and always keen to play up some fun ideas. But he's a role player at heart, you see. So he enjoys all the funny stuff.
Yeah. I love that idea. After speaking to Rich, I must have gone into some sort of trance because I bought Infamy and the Kriegspiel from the Lardies that night. So I'm looking forward to having a go at that myself. It's something I've never done before, but. The
Kriegspiel ones have been really good fun, actually. Yeah, we played one with Richard. Well, I played quite a few with Richard and Nick, actually. I've been dragged along into those and run a few for them as well.
Yeah.
And, they're really immersive. And we were talking earlier on about the experience that a general might really face and the decisions they might have to make. And those Kriegspiel ones probably actually get you making decisions more accurately than you ever would do inside a war game, which you know the rules.
Yes.
And you know the constraints and you know your chance of this happening. You get all kinds of interesting situations where on the tabletop you know exactly what was happening because you could see all the figures and you could work out the odds and you think, well, I've got a 70% chance of capturing that tower in the next 3 turns. And then the Kriegspiel, you sit there and your doubts suddenly take over and you think to yourself, well, I've got 4 battalions of soldiers, but maybe they've got more soldiers hiding around the back in reserve or something, and you hold off, make a completely terrible strategic mistake or something that on a war games table with figures you just might not do, and it really creates that fog of war element that you maybe don't have on the tabletop, and also some awful situations as well in which you're forced to make decisions which normally are pretty awful. And you realise that, in fact, no longer are you sort of the Alexander the Great that you dreamed you ever were. In fact, you realise you'd be one of those D-list generals who was probably kicked out after the first few weeks of the war, because you were so terrible and they'd soldiers their deaths terribly. Well, at least that's my experience anyway. So,
I'm currently involved in a email campaign, which
wonderful.
I guess must be run sort of along Kriegspiel guidelines, but I've absolutely no idea what I'm doing. It's down in your part of the country it's taking place, actually, all across the south. I'm sort of in between Newbury and it's an English Civil War campaign.
Yep. Newbury and
Winchester. I'm under siege in Winchester at the moment.
Oh, good. I've written an article on that as well, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Winchester's quite close for a little day trip out there. So there's some interesting Civil War battles that are taking place around Winchester.
The interesting bit is I've absolutely no idea what the hell I'm doing or what anybody else is doing.
But that's the joy of it, and probably the same experiences the commanders had at the time as well.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of Civil War stuff around Hampshire that's well worth seeing. I was up at Cheriton the other day for a walk in the countryside with my kids and stuff. That's great battlefield just outside of Winchester, and just across the about 10 miles south of that, down at Romsey. There was another little Civil War battle there as well, which I've written an article on about and things. So there's quite a lot going on in Hampshire. And it's really interesting to find out those little local stories of battles that are maybe involving a couple of hundred people that are very, very gameable and really interesting, but just aren't that well known to the sort of general narrative of the English Civil War and the big battles and things.
English Civil War is another sort of, I've got a lot of interest in civil wars. Stop, to be honest. What makes one country tear itself apart? So English Civil War, American Civil War, Spanish Civil War. English Civil War because we've got that local context. But it's a really interesting experience. Never having done anything like this before, and to have the umpire sending me through cryptic messages about troop movements and my own commanding officer telling me what I need to do, and I'm saying, well, I can't do that because of this. Really, and even at work, I'm getting emails ping. I had an email through at work today that pinged through that said that there needs to be an urgent dispatch to deal with this situation. I'm like, well, I'm in work at the moment, but okay, I'll try and sort it out for you. Give me 10 minutes.
They're dangerously immersive. Especially Rich and Nick's ones, if you ever get a chance to be in one of those.
I'd love to.
And completely anarchic at the same time.
Can imagine.
And I've been nicknamed by them Peaches ever since because of my my refusal to hand out peach supplies to the local population of Larden. And they then had a giant peach riot in which they then broke into the stores and threw cans of peaches at my soldiers and generally caused havoc.
That's right up my street, mate, to be honest.
Well, it's good fun.
Mate, thanks very much for your time tonight. I've got one more little task for you.
Go on.
Well, one of which will be if you've got anything to plug, but we'll come on to that shortly. But there is a virtual God's Own Scale library that every guest has to leave a book and deposit a book in.
Okay.
For other people to peruse. So it can be on military history, it can be on wargaming history generally.
Okay.
The choice is yours, and I know I never prep anybody. I always say,
oh my God, can I run to my bookshelf now? Give me 20 seconds. Hold on. Look at that. Oh.
Never noticed you were gone, mate. Never noticed you were gone.
You never noticed we were gone. That's the joy of the technology you're using there. Right, there's 2 books, actually, and one of them must be up on my bedside. I must be reading it again for the 15th time through. But one book is The Roman Army at War by Adrian Goldsworthy.
Yeah.
Which is basically what it does is it pinches the same sort of ideas from Keegan's Face of Battle and applies it then to the Roman world inside. Is basically in the 1st century BC and 1st century AD effectively. And for those of you who are really keen on playing Infamy and that kind of thing there, that probably is the book in terms of thinking about how the Roman army fought into that time period there, and really breaks it down into looking at the generals' battle and their experience, and the individual units' battle and the individual soldiers' battles as well, and sort of uses a lot of primary sources inside it to try to reconstruct what that Roman battle was like. And I think that's an absolutely fantastic read if you like your Roman stuff there. But I've got another one here as well, which is a bit tatty now, which I think I brought at exactly the same time when I went to Oxford, to the big bookshop there, which is Battles of the Greek and Roman World, a compendium, John Drogo Montague, and I think that's an absolutely classic introduction to ancient battles for those of you who probably look around at some of the ancient texts and go, well, I'm not sure I want to read Herodotus and Tacitus and Plutarch and things like that there. What it does is it basically gives summaries of all the battle bits inside it, all the good bits, the bits you'd enjoy, and cites where all the sources are and summarises them in a nice sort of overview using all the different primary sources, and then tells you where to find out about this original sources from. And that's a great starting point for so many battles and so many games I've had down the club you wouldn't believe. So if you're interested in Roman battles or Greek battles, that's the one. That only goes up until 31 BC, but it's a classic one. There it must have about 800-900 battles inside it, described inside it. So a great place to start your scenario writing, and if you like your Romans and Greeks, that's the place to go to.
Mate, that sounds absolutely fantastic. That will take pride of place, or both books will take pride of place on the God's Own Scale virtual library shelves. I love that. In fact, you mentioned the Keegan book there, Face of Battle. It's a firm favourite of mine. So if the Roman
If you like Keegan, you'll like that Goldsworthy. In fairness, Goldsworthy's done some pretty classic ones. I know he's a wargamer himself, so
yes,
he tends to sort of write things that you sort of know that wargamers will probably secretly quite enjoy. Yeah. And focuses on all the details that no one else would really care to be interested in, but we quite like, really, don't we?
Yeah,
he hits the nail on the head for me, really.
Yeah, brilliant. Mate, thanks so much for your time.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
I know we had a little bit of technical difficulty halfway through, but through the power of editing, that will be seamless and nobody will notice. Apart from the fact I've just disclosed it.
Well, there we are.
Have you got anything coming up, mate, that you want to shout out about? Or
not really, no. I suppose keep watching the space and listening to the WSS podcast, and I might be able to give you some more tantalising glimpses of what's happening with Homunculus Est. If that actually appears in any form of gaming thing, then that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Published up somewhere. And I'm hoping, and I've said this now for the last 2 years, that Constantinople 1453 will be on the road at some point there. And I might even, take it north of the Watford Gap if shows ever start again. If I painted 80,000 figures for it and 4 foot of Byzantine walls, then frankly, it needs to be seen a few times. So I'll try and get it on the road a bit and try and get people playing that. So do please come along and say hello. And, you might even possibly recognise me at some point, although I'll try and be in disguise deliberately.
With 80,000 troops, I think you can conquer the north, no problem whatsoever.
Yeah, but they are in 2 mil, so you'll struggle to see them.
Even so,
the spectacle should look pretty good anyway. Yeah. So hopefully we'll actually get that. We'll actually see the light of day at some point there.
Yeah.
And otherwise, I'll enthusiastically support WSS magazine, although there's lots of other good ones out there. And if you do want to start writing more 6 mil things, or 3 or 2 mil or 10 mil or whatever, some of the smaller scales out there, it'd be great to have some articles that covered those, and I'm sure we'd love them in our magazines. But equally, please get them along to the other magazines as well, because, I think the more attention that they get and the more quality articles we get with good photographs, then actually, the more we can sell this wonderful scale, which offers so much, and such a different way of wargaming than 28mm figures, and the hobby standard, I suppose, for a lot of people, and maybe get them thinking a slightly different way about how much fun wargames can be in different scales.
So the challenge is out there, folks, then, and it's been laid down, the gauntlet is thrown down, get those photography skills up and get typing away on these articles. You're pretty visible on Twitter as well?
Oh, yeah, I am. Yeah, what am I on Twitter? I think I need to check my own Twitter now, don't I? That's terrible, isn't it? What am I? I'm at Mark Backhouse 29.
There we go.
There we go. And so I tend to post up all kinds of silly pictures on there and talk about anything that's going on, really. So, please by all means have a follow, or just go and peruse through the picture library there and see. You can see some of the photographs of the Constantinople project and some of these other 2mm things there as well, which are hopefully a nice bit of eye candy for some of you. And also on Facebook, I'm quite often on there's a 2mm wargaming thing on Facebook as well, which I tend to be on quite a bit as well. And there's lots of really exciting, innovative ideas on there about how to recreate things in 2mm and trick people into thinking that they're lots of beautifully painted figures, when in actual fact they're little tiny bits of Velcro or something like that.
Yes. I'll check that out. I wasn't aware of the Facebook group, so I'll have a look at
that.
Yeah,
no, it's a good one. In fact, it's run by your mate who did the Twilight of the Sun King, I'm saying.
Sun King Divine.
Nick
Durrell.
Nick Durrell. Yeah, so Nick Durrell's one of the big cheeses behind it there. So, have a look at that, please do. Come and join us.
Pleased of that plug. Mate, again, thanks very much for your time. And the one plea I make out to any guest that comes on is that you'll agree to come on again at some point in the future. So maybe once Constantinople is out in the wild, we can have a chat about that. But hopefully we'll cross everything we can to say that the world might be back to some sort of normal by the middle of next year.
I hope so.
In time for Partisan.
I don't want to do a remote version of it. Not with my internet connection today.
No. You and me both, mate. You and me both. But mate, thanks very much for your time. It's been great.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks ever so much, Sean. Thanks for having me on. Look forward to seeing you again.
No worries, mate.
What's beyond the great 100 miles? Take me over there, drop me anywhere.
Oh, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that. I've had some incredible technical issues this episode. It's now 2:15 in the morning, but your faithful podcast host has managed, I think, to pull the cat out of the bag and get this episode sorted. I'll leave the update on my own hobby news for now and talk about it next time when I'll be speaking to John, aka Whirlwind, from the Heretical Gaming blog, which hopefully should be up in about a week to 10 days time. I hope you enjoyed that chat with Mark. Really interesting conversation there, especially around his approach to his 2mm projects with the Siege of Portsmouth and the upcoming Constantinople game, which, as I said at the start of the show, hopefully once the world starts to return to normal next year, we may get to see at a couple of shows, who knows. So I'll close out the show saying thanks very much for listening. Thank you for your support. All of the emails and the comments that I get just help me and spur me on to get the next episode out. It's a great community that we're part of, and I'm proud to be a small piece of that with the God's Own Scale podcast. So as ever, stay safe, play nice, and keep talking about six.
Brother Bertie went away to do his bit the other day, with a smile on his lips and his left hand and pips
upon his shoulder, bright and gay. As the train moved out, he sang, "Remember me to all the birds." Then he wagged his paw and went away to war, shouting out these pathetic words. Goodbye, goodbye, oh, I'm so dear, baby dear, from your eye. Though it's hard to part, I know, I'll feel because the death to go. Don't cry, don't sigh, there's a silver lining in the sky. Bonsoir, all things, cheerio, chin chin, la boo, toodaloo, goodbye. At the concert down at Phew, some convalescent dressed in blue had to hear Lady Lee, who had turned 83, sing all the old songs she knew. Then she made a speech and said, "I look upon you boys with pride, and for what you've done I'm going to kiss each one." Then they all grabbed their sticks and cried, "Goodbye, goodbye, oh, and a dear baby dear from your eye. Though it's hard to part, I know, I'll feel because the death to go. Don't cry, don't sigh, there's a silver lining in the sky. Bonsoir, all things, cheerio, chin chin, na boo, toodaloo, goodbye." Little Private Hendrik saw he was the prisoner of war, till the Hun with the gun called him pig dog for fun, and Paddy punched him on the door. Right across the barbed wire fence, the German dropped, then dear, oh dear. All the wire gave way and Paddy yelled hooray as he ran for the Dutch frontier. Goodbye, goodbye, oh, I'm so dear, baby dear, from your eye. Though it's hard to part, I know, I'll feel because the death to go. Don't cry, don't sigh, there's a silver lining in the sky. Bonsoir, all things, cheerio.